Jack Smith exposes White House plot to destroy FBI careers. George Will video. Length estimate 20 minutes. They fired the career agents. They stripped the security clearances. And then they issued the executive order. For hours, Jack Smith sat in a deposition room in Washington, not to defend himself but to sound an alarm. He laid out a systematic campaign of retribution, the destruction of FBI careers, and the hollowing out of American justice itself. He spoke about an FBI agent on his team who served in war zones, who came from a family of public servants, who was fired 2 weeks after his wife died. Smith went to that funeral. He saw a church full of federal agents and prosecutors mourning not just a death, but the death of something larger. The man in that casket had just lost his livelihood for investigating a former president. What Jack Smith said in that closed-door deposition is no longer a secret. This is the story of what happens when revenge becomes policy. To understand what happened in that room, you first have to understand who Jack Smith is. This is not a political operative. This is not someone who came up through party politics or campaign operations. Jack Smith has spent nearly 3 decades as a prosecutor, building cases against criminals regardless of who they were or which party they belonged to. He started his career in 1994 as an assistant district attorney at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office in New York City. For 5 years, he prosecuted local crimes, handling domestic violence cases, street crime, the grinding daily work of justice that never makes headlines. From there, he moved to the Eastern District of New York in Brooklyn. He stayed there for 9 years, taking on larger, more complex cases, gang prosecutions, public corruption, civil rights violations. He rose to become the chief of criminal litigation for the entire district, overseeing some of the most significant federal prosecutions in the region. But Smith did not stop there. He left the comfortable confines of federal prosecution in New York to go to The Hague. For nearly 2 years, he worked at the International Criminal Court, coordinating investigations for war crimes. He investigated atrocities in Kosovo, in Darfur. He built cases against people who ordered mass killings and ethnic cleansing. And then he came back to the United States and continued his work as a prosecutor. He served under both Democratic and Republican administrations. His reputation was built not on ideology, but on one simple principle: follow the evidence wherever it leads. In November 2022, Attorney General Merrick Garland appointed him as special counsel to investigate 2 matters: Donald Trump's retention of classified documents and efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Smith did not seek this job. He did not campaign for it. He was chosen because of his record, because of his independence, because he had prosecuted powerful people before and had never flinched. When he sat down for this deposition in early 2025, the atmosphere was heavy with the weight of recent history. We are talking about a moment where the machinery of the Justice Department had already begun to turn against the very people who conducted these investigations. Smith began his testimony not by talking about legal theories or prosecutorial discretion. He began by talking about the people on his team and what had happened to them. Smith revealed something heartbreaking early in his testimony. He spoke about an FBI agent who had been part of his investigative team. This was not some bureaucrat pushing papers in Washington. This was a man who had served his country in multiple war zones overseas. He came from a family of public servants. His wife's family were public servants. This agent dedicated his life to protecting Americans, first in combat zones abroad, and then by investigating threats at home. And this agent was fired. He was fired 2 weeks after his wife died. Jack Smith told the committee that he went to that funeral. He saw the agent's family. He saw children who had just lost their mother, now watching their father lose his career. He saw a church full of federal agents and career prosecutors, people who had spent decades serving their country, all of them knowing that what happened to this agent could happen to any of them. Smith's voice, according to those present, wavered when he described this. He said there was no reason a person like that should have to go through that. He called it contrary to the rule of law. He called it contrary to who we are as a country. But the retribution did not stop with individual agents. It went straight to the lawyers representing Jack Smith himself. We learned from this deposition that the White House issued a formal executive order specifically targeting the law firm that represented Smith. The order directed the Attorney General to immediately suspend the security clearances of Peter Kofsky, Smith's attorney, and everyone at his law firm, Covington and Burling LLP, who had assisted the special counsel. Think about that for a moment. The executive branch used its power to strip security clearances from private attorneys because they represented someone who investigated the president. This was not a criminal charge. This was not an allegation of wrongdoing. This was punishment for association. The executive order stated that this suspension would remain pending a review of their roles in what it called the weaponization of the judicial process. Smith was asked directly about the purpose of this order. His answer was blunt. He said he believed the president sought retribution against him personally. He said the order was designed to chill people from associating with him, to make it harder for lawyers to represent him, to isolate him professionally and legally. This is not just about one FBI agent or one set of lawyers. It is about the systematic dismantling of the institutions that are supposed to operate independently of political pressure. When you fire career FBI agents for following the evidence, when you strip security clearances from lawyers for representing a prosecutor, you are not protecting the country. You are sending a message. Loyalty to the person in power matters more than loyalty to the law. Let's dig into the actual scale of what Jack Smith exposed regarding the purge of FBI personnel. This is the heart of the matter. Throughout his testimony, Smith provided details about the wave of terminations that swept through the FBI and the Department of Justice in the weeks and months following the change in administration. According to Smith's testimony, career FBI agents who had worked on both the classified documents case and the January 6th investigation were systematically removed from their positions. These were not political appointees. These were career law enforcement officers, many with decades of service. Smith emphasized this distinction repeatedly. He said these were people who had served under multiple administrations, both Democratic and Republican. They had conducted investigations into Democrats and Republicans alike. Their loyalty was to the Constitution and the rule of law, not to any political party. The timeline Smith laid out was striking. Within weeks of the new administration taking office, agents began receiving termination notices. Some were fired outright, others were placed on administrative leave and told their security clearances were being reviewed. Still others were reassigned to positions far from their areas of expertise, effectively ending their careers in federal law enforcement. Smith described how the firings followed a clear pattern. If you had worked on the Trump investigations, you were a target. It did not matter if you were simply following orders from supervisors. It did not matter if you were conducting routine investigative work like reviewing documents or interviewing witnesses. The mere fact of your involvement made you vulnerable. Smith revealed that some agents learned they were being fired through news reports before they received official notification. Others found out when they tried to access FBI systems and discovered their credentials had been revoked. One agent, Smith testified, was terminated while on approved medical leave recovering from surgery. The evidence Smith presented showed this was not a series of isolated personnel decisions. This was a coordinated campaign. He described how agents were called in for what they thought were routine meetings, only to be handed termination letters. He described how some agents were escorted from FBI buildings by security as if they were criminal suspects rather than decorated law enforcement officers. He described how families were devastated, how mortgages went unpaid, how children's college funds were suddenly in jeopardy. These were not abstract bureaucratic decisions. These were the destruction of real lives, real careers, real families. Smith also revealed the justifications given for these firings, or more accurately, the lack of justifications. Many agents received no explanation at all. Others were told vaguely that their services were no longer needed or that they had shown poor judgment. When pressed for specifics, supervisors often could not or would not provide them. The message was clear. Investigating the president, even when authorized by the Attorney General, and even when following proper legal procedures, had become grounds for termination. Smith pointed out the chilling effect this creates. He said that when career agents see their colleagues fired for doing their jobs, when they see decades of service erased overnight, when they see their own livelihoods threatened simply for following the evidence, it fundamentally changes how the FBI operates. Future investigations become compromised. Agents start making decisions based not on where the evidence leads, but on who might retaliate against them. But it didn't stop there. Smith also testified about what happened to prosecutors and support staff in the special counsel's office. Career prosecutors who had left prestigious positions at major law firms or who had turned down lucrative private sector opportunities to serve in the special counsel's office found themselves unemployed. Support staff, administrative personnel, analysts who had worked behind the scenes were also terminated. Smith emphasized that these were not Trump appointees. These were career Justice Department employees, some with 20 or 30 years of service. They had processed evidence, managed files, handled logistics. Their work was purely administrative, yet they too were swept up in the purge. One prosecutor, Smith revealed, had worked on high-profile terrorism cases, had put away dangerous criminals, had a spotless record. That prosecutor was fired and told that their work on the Trump investigation showed a lack of judgment. When the prosecutor asked what specifically showed poor judgment, what legal error had been made, what procedural mistake had occurred, there was no answer. The decision had already been made. Smith described the broader institutional damage. He warned that when you fire the experts, the people who know national security law inside and out, the people who have spent decades investigating complex financial crimes and public corruption, the people who mentor young prosecutors and teach them how to build cases properly, you do not just hurt those individuals. You hollow out the Department of Justice for generations. He compared it to what happened to agencies in authoritarian countries, where expertise is replaced with loyalty and competence is sacrificed for political reliability. He said we are returning to a patronage system, where what matters is not whether you can do the job well, but whether you pledge allegiance to the right person. This was the most urgent warning in Smith's testimony. Not about any one case or any one defendant, but about the systematic destruction of institutional independence. While the firings of FBI agents were devastating on a personal level, Smith's testimony revealed something even more insidious: the use of executive power to cripple his legal defense and send a message to anyone who might associate with him. The executive order targeting Covington and Burling LLP was not a casual decision. It was a formal presidential action published in the Federal Register, using the full weight of executive authority. Smith walked the committee through the specific language of the order. It directed the Attorney General and all relevant heads of executive departments and agencies to immediately take steps to suspend security clearances for Peter Kofsky and all members, partners, and employees of Covington and Burling LLP who assisted Smith during his time as special counsel. The suspension would remain in place pending a review of their roles in what the order called the weaponization of the judicial process. But the order went further. It also directed government agencies to terminate any existing engagements with Covington and Burling LLP to the maximum extent permitted by law. This meant that one of the country's most prestigious law firms, a firm that had represented government agencies for decades, that had worked on national security matters, that had lawyers with decades of experience in federal practice, was suddenly blacklisted. And why? Not because they had done anything illegal, not because they had violated ethical rules, but because they had represented Jack Smith. Smith testified that this order had an immediate practical impact. Lawyers at Covington who had security clearances needed for other client matters suddenly found those clearances suspended. This affected their ability to represent other clients, including clients who had nothing to do with Smith or the Trump investigations. Partners at the firm faced a choice: continue representing Smith and risk the firm's other business, or abandon a client facing political retaliation. Smith described conversations with his lawyers after the order was issued. Some lawyers at the firm, lawyers who had worked on the case for months, lawyers who knew the evidence inside and out, were forced to withdraw because without security clearances they could not access the classified materials that were central to the case. Smith had to find new attorneys, bring them up to speed, while the clock was ticking on legal deadlines. He said the order achieved exactly what it was designed to achieve. It made it harder for him to mount an effective legal defense, and it sent a message to other lawyers that representing Jack Smith or anyone associated with him came with severe professional consequences. Smith was asked if he believed this violated his constitutional right to legal representation. He said he was not a constitutional scholar, but he knew that in America everyone is supposed to have the right to a lawyer. He said that when the government uses its power to punish lawyers for representing someone, that right becomes theoretical rather than real. The committee also learned about threats Smith himself had received. Smith confirmed that he and his family had been subjected to death threats, that security measures had been put in place, that his daily life had been fundamentally altered by the decision to take on these investigations. He was asked if he felt like he had a target on his back. His answer was simple: yes. But Smith did not dwell on his own situation. He kept returning to the broader principle. He said that in America, prosecutors are supposed to make decisions based on facts and law, not based on fear of what might happen to them personally. He said that when you create a system where prosecutors are afraid to investigate powerful people, where agents are afraid to follow leads that might implicate someone politically connected, you do not have a justice system anymore. You have something else. Throughout the deposition, committee members threw various conspiracy theories and alternative explanations at Jack Smith. They tried to suggest that the FBI agents were fired not because of the Trump investigations, but because of legitimate performance issues. Smith dismantled this calmly. He pointed out that many of the fired agents had received excellent performance reviews just months before their terminations. He pointed out that some had received commendations and awards for their work. He asked why, if these were legitimate personnel decisions based on performance, did they all happen to involve people who worked on the Trump cases? Smith also addressed the claim that he was biased against Trump, that he had conducted a political witch hunt. His response was methodical. He explained that his team consisted of career prosecutors, not political operatives. He explained that they had consulted with legal experts across the political spectrum. He explained that the indictments were approved by grand juries, regular citizens drawn from the community who heard the evidence and found probable cause to believe crimes had been committed. One of the strangest moments came when committee members suggested that Smith had orchestrated leaks to the media to damage Trump politically. Smith's response was one of flat denial backed by facts. He said his office had a strict policy against talking to the press about ongoing investigations. He said that, to his knowledge, no one on his team had leaked information. He pointed out that most of the media coverage was based on public court filings, not leaks. He noted that in the classified documents case, the key evidence came from Trump's own lawyers and from subpoenaed surveillance footage, not from secret sources. It was a stark illustration of the disconnect between the conspiracy theories circulating online and the mundane reality of how federal prosecutions actually work. The committee tried to suggest that Smith had rushed the investigations to interfere with the 2024 election. Smith's answer was precise. He said the speed of the investigation reflected the strength of the evidence and the cooperation of witnesses. He said they moved quickly because the evidence was compelling and because the Justice Department has a policy of not wanting cases to drag on unnecessarily. He said if he had wanted to interfere with an election, he would have brought charges earlier, not later. He pointed out that he had actually slowed down certain parts of the investigation when he encountered legal complexity because his obligation was to build a solid case, not to meet a political timeline. Time after time, Smith pivoted back to the evidence. He pivoted back to the text messages from Trump's employees discussing moving boxes of documents. He pivoted back to the testimony of Republican election officials who told Trump he had lost. He pivoted back to the surveillance footage showing boxes being moved before the FBI arrived. This was not a man defending a political agenda. This was a prosecutor defending the concept of truth itself. Smith was asked directly about whether anyone had pressured him to bring charges. The questions were blunt, and his answers were equally blunt. Did Attorney General Garland ever press him to be more aggressive in his investigation? No. Did any DOJ officials suggest that he was expected to bring charges? No. Did anyone from the White House, including President Biden, ever tell him they expected charges to be filed? No. Smith explained that his decision to indict was based entirely on the facts and the law. He said he consulted with his team of career prosecutors. They debated the potential defenses. They looked at the strength of the evidence. They consulted the criminal statutes. They considered whether they could prove the charges beyond a reasonable doubt. Only after that analysis did Smith make the decision to seek indictments. He emphasized that he had zero contact with the Biden White House regarding the substance of the cases. When his office needed to interview career staffers at the National Security Council for the documents case, they followed strict protocols to avoid any appearance of political coordination. When they needed classification reviews, they went through proper channels. Smith also addressed the principle that has guided his career. He referenced a famous speech by Robert Jackson, who served as both Attorney General and Supreme Court Justice. Jackson warned that the most dangerous power a prosecutor has is to pick a person and then search law books to find a crime to pin on them. Smith said he had been guided by Jackson's warning for 30 years. He said he did not have a preconceived outcome when he was appointed special counsel. He said if the facts had not supported prosecution, he would have closed the investigation. He has done it before. He closed investigations into Democrats when the evidence was insufficient. He closed investigations into Republicans when the evidence did not support charges. In this case, after months of investigation, after reviewing thousands of documents, after interviewing hundreds of witnesses, the evidence led him to one conclusion: crimes had been committed. This connects back to the very beginning of our story. The destruction of FBI careers, the targeting of lawyers, the use of executive power to punish those who investigated. Smith sees a direct line between the evidence his team uncovered, the charges they brought, and the retribution that followed. He told the committee that this is not just about Donald Trump or any one person. It is about whether America will remain a country where the law applies equally to everyone, or whether it will become a country where power protects itself. Smith warned that we are seeing the loss of institutional expertise that took generations to build. He said that when you fire career agents with 20 or 30 years of experience, you do not just lose those individuals. You lose the knowledge they would have passed on to younger agents. You lose the mentorship, the institutional memory, the accumulated wisdom of how to investigate complex cases. He said it will take a generation to rebuild what is being destroyed in a matter of months. The broader implication, Smith suggested, is that future prosecutors and agents will think twice before taking on cases involving powerful political figures. They will ask themselves, is it worth risking my career? Is it worth risking my family's financial security? Is it worth becoming a target? And when good people start answering no to those questions, when competent professionals decide that public service is not worth the personal risk, the justice system begins to fail. Smith predicted that we will see more corruption go unprosecuted, more abuses of power go unchallenged, more evidence ignored because no one wants to be the next target. He said that is how democracies die, not with a bang but with a whimper, with good people deciding it is safer to look the other way. As we close, we have to look at what this testimony really represents. It is a historical record, preserved in thousands of pages of transcript, of what happened when a prosecutor followed the evidence against a former president and then watched as that president returned to power and systematically destroyed the careers of everyone involved. Jack Smith did not scream. He did not shout. He sat for hours and answered questions with the precision of a surgeon, dismantling conspiracy theories not with rhetoric but with dates, times, witness names, and documentary evidence. He reminded the committee that the Justice Department is not a building in Washington. It is a collection of people. The FBI agents who knock on doors at dawn, the analysts who sift through financial records, the prosecutors who stand up in court and speak for the United States of America. When you fire them for doing their jobs, when you strip their security clearances, when you threaten them with investigations simply for following the evidence, you do not just hurt them. You hurt every American who depends on the rule of law. Smith's warning was clear. We are returning to a system where loyalty matters more than competence, where political allegiance matters more than integrity. But his legacy, contained in these thousands of words of sworn testimony, is now part of the permanent record. It is a detailed accounting of how the plot to destroy FBI careers was not a series of isolated decisions, but a coordinated campaign of revenge. The cases against Trump may never go to trial. The pardons may wipe away the legal consequences for others. But the facts, as Jack Smith laid them out under oath, cannot be erased. The FBI agent fired 2 weeks after his wife died. The lawyers stripped of security clearances for representing their client. The career prosecutors terminated for following the evidence. These are not abstractions. These are real people whose lives were destroyed for doing what they thought was right. Smith ended his testimony by saying that if he were presented with the same facts today, he would make the same decision. He said that seeking truth is what separates a legitimate justice system from a system of revenge, and after reading this testimony, after seeing the evidence he compiled, after understanding the price paid by those who worked with him, it is hard to argue otherwise. That is the story of how Jack Smith exposed the White House plot to destroy FBI careers. It is the story of evidence ignored, of lives destroyed, and of a warning about what happens when the rule of law gives way to the rule of revenge. Thank you for watching. This channel is dedicated to reading the primary sources, so you do not have to rely on the spin. If you found this breakdown valuable, please subscribe and share this with anyone who needs to understand what really happened. The documents do not lie. The testimony is on the record. And the truth, no matter how buried, always finds its way to light.